Hi, welcome to Vietnam Real Estate Insights, the program that discusses the market trends with leading industry experts here. I'm your host, Harlow Russell. Today, our expert is Alex Crane, the General Manager of Cushman Wakefield, Vietnam, and he'll be discussing the opportunities and the challenges of investing your money in property in Vietnam. Alex, thanks for being here and sharing your time with us.
Thank you, Harlow.
Great. I'm going to tell the viewers a little bit about you first.
Sure. Thank
Great. So, Alex is an expert with a focus in capital markets and tenant advisory for office and industrial space and properties here. Alex has been in commercial real estate since 2003, beginning his career in the UK. He's been here in Vietnam since 2011 and was involved in the first LEED gold accredited office building here, which is called President Place. Alex works with global MNCs needing office and industrial space and was involved in 3 of the largest 6 office deals in Vietnam last year. He's been with Cushman Wakefield 2 years. Welcome. So, Alex, tell us a little bit about Cushman Wakefield in Vietnam and what the operations do here.
Sure. We've been in Vietnam for 7 years, so quite late to the party in comparison to some of the other guys here. Critically, I think Cushman, we come with a different mindset. You mentioned our occupier advisory, so we generally are known as the guys that work for the buyers and occupiers as opposed to those selling. So Cushman, we've built quite an interesting position on that, working on behalf of companies. For Cushman and Wakefield globally, it's been a very interesting year. We've just been through the merger with DTZ. Thankfully, that closed in September and we can get back to business as normal. So it's a very exciting time for us as a wider business, create something of quite colossal scale, actually, in terms of the global footprint we now have and the workforce worldwide and the expertise that we carry. In Vietnam, we're quite focused in our business operations. We principally carry 4 key markets across tenant advisory, retail, valuations, and project management. So we're very nimble, very focused, and hopefully some of the best in those sectors.
Very good. Well, thank you. Well, first question. There have been commercial property slumps here in Vietnam, most recently just a few years ago. So the increase in the market and the interest in the market, well, could it be the beginning of another slump or another bubble? What do you think?
It's certainly not a bubble across the commercial spheres. We're seeing certainly an increase in activity and interest in Vietnam, principally through, if you look across the industrial sphere, in its entirety, we'll see more activity going forward for sure. This is irrespective of the TPP and various other free trade agreements. There's a real demand, largely based on affordability on real estate, but also labour costs. We're very, very competitive on a regional basis. So I think that's looking great for next year.
Okay.
The office sector, we'll see 2 different cycles across the country, really. They're probably 2 different trajectories if we look at Ho Chi Minh versus Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh, we're looking at rent growth going forward into next year, probably 7 or 8%, and a reverse in Hanoi. That really is led by the amount of supply and construction. Not had enough in Ho Chi Minh City, and we've got low vacancy. Which is opposite in Hanoi, where we've got high vacancy and probably too much development.
Wow, that's really interesting that the 2 cities would be so different. Is that also because there's more commercial business in Ho Chi Minh versus Hanoi being, the seat of government, or are there some other factors that kind of contribute towards this opposite markets between the 2 cities?
Sure, yeah, I think you've nailed it. Ho Chi Minh has always been the commercial powerhouse, and it's the choice location for most multinational HQs. Across our client base, we probably see on average the headcount, if you look at the office component, it's probably half in Hanoi as what it is in Ho Chi Minh City.
Really?
So yeah, quite a dramatic difference.
So does that mean that potentially in terms of commercial space, there's lots of bargains to be had, whether you're leasing or potentially looking to buy in Hanoi versus a tighter market in Ho Chi Minh, and prices are going to be quite different between the cities?
Yes, yeah, and the trajectories, as I say, are very, very different. In Hanoi, we've seen a couple of cases this year we've dealt with lease renewals, which are not always the most competitive negotiation. As a tenant staying, the landlord knows they don't have to carry expense on a relocation, which is costly and difficult. But even on a renewal, we've seen reductions in rents as much as 30 or 40%, which
in Hanoi
over a 3-year period.
Wow.
Set cases, with the right approach, can be achieved. That's extreme, but that's certainly a trend across the market there.
Wow. And between the two cities, in terms of your business, are you seeing, can you give a rough idea of renewals or existing clients versus new companies coming into Vietnam? What would be the kind of ratios in both cities of existing versus newcomers coming into the country?
Sure. Well, on the scale that we tend to operate, it's largely existing businesses that are here.
Okay.
A lot of the entrants are very small as they come in, typically as a rep office. So even when they do come in, it takes some time for them to actually impact on the markets. But that said, there is good interest from overseas from a number of the larger sort of multinationals that are not here yet. Most do, though, come in on a smaller scale. One that's quite interesting that might change that trend between the two cities was the partnership with MetLife and BIDV, which happened over the last 12 months. An odd case in which MetLife headquartered in Hanoi, whereas most are down here. That may be a relation with BIDV Bank being in Hanoi.
Yes.
But we may see that trend unfold going forward if companies are sort of ushered towards the regulatory center.
I see. You mentioned TPP, so obviously that's big news for Vietnam, and there's a lot of expectations that there will be an influx of investment, particularly from the United States. What's your view of TPP and how it affects your business? How does it affect your planning, if any, looking out 2016, 17, 18?
Sure. We're taking a slightly cautious approach to it.
Okay.
I think most are, and we've still got a long way to go for the agreements, and then of course the implementation. But as I said, we're seeing sentiment sort of become more positive on the back of this, particularly industrial and retail as well, which will have a knock-on effect to service providers and everybody else. But I think that the big win for Vietnam is going to be this industrial manufacturing piece. As trade here becomes easier, export becomes easier, import. There's going to be positivities across that. We're already seeing some good inquiries from companies that perhaps over the last 2 or 3 years may not have considered Vietnam. So we're competing better on a regional basis, which is great to see. Recently we had a visit by our regional head of retail. His viewpoint on TPP was quite different to mine, and it was great to hear his expertise.
Okay. What was his opinion?
He was looking at Indochina as a cluster, almost as a region. So everyone here is very centric on Vietnam and how we're going to benefit.
Yes.
From a retailer's perspective, from an operator's perspective, his view is we will then look at that as a wider region. And for retailers, scale is everything. So whether that's the footprint, led by the footprint, that means that their efficiencies in operations, resource, trade of goods between or products becomes easier. So maybe we start seeing that real Indochina region benefiting as a whole, as opposed to from the retail sector, Vietnam in isolation.
Yes, conversations here are always about Vietnam and just Vietnam, so that's interesting. Back to industrial space. When you talk about industrial, what does that mean, per se, in Vietnam, and is there any nuances here that are different from other countries when you talk about the industrial space or industrial sector? Or is it pretty much the same as you would see in any other country?
Yeah, I mean, as a sector, it's quite challenging. Through the regulatory approval process, also the landlord, it doesn't make investment into industrial real estate as easy as it is in some of the other countries, which is something we need to be cautious of. But we're finding more and more companies that are aware of this. We're better able to manage them through that process. The sector is probably the most transparent in terms of pricing.
Really?
And Vietnam is famous for the lack of transparency.
Yes. Okay. So we have to set the stage there. Yes.
So that's quite a positive, and it means the market can mature quite quickly.
So does that mean if you're involved in industrial space or need industrial space, you can find data, you can find pricing history more readily, or what does it mean, your comment that it is slightly more transparent than, say, the residential or other sectors.
I think one step at a time on the transparency.
Yes.
I mean, there's no data, there's no central source for information. Perhaps it's just easier to track in terms of, the park activity is very isolated in certain areas.
I see.
And the benchmarking is very similar within parks, so we can get a very clear gauge as to what's actually happening.
I see.
Really being paid.
Very good. Well, so overall, our viewers are international investors, global investors, maybe retail, or it could be institutional. So why should they consider to put Vietnam on their radar screen in terms of investment or purchase? What's in your opinion happening that justifies, hey, you should maybe consider investing in industrial or commercial property in Vietnam now versus other countries?
I think it's threefold. I think it's the demographics of Vietnam on a micro level, trade, as we've discussed, on TPP and various others, and European, Korean trade investments announced this week. The key part, I think, for Vietnam is the stability, which might sound unusual, but I think we've got that on an economic basis. It looks as though inflation's under control. We had a bit of a hit on the currency, but not outside a 5-year average, so we're quite comfortable there. But that stability, obviously politically, performs very well when compared to places like Indonesia. But maturity of the market, so if we're looking at stability across markets also, as we're getting reasonable levels of inventory, it actually makes forecasting, researching and feasibilities across sectors far easier as we're hitting maturity. You mentioned the volatility of a few years ago.
Yes.
Myanmar is probably probably on the downward swing of that now because the market inventory is so small. If we're looking specifically at offices. We had that in 2008. There was a period of 12 months where rents doubled and halved.
Wow.
That can't happen again, or if it does, we'll be building 1 million square meters of offices every year. So we've reached that level, not quite full maturity, but enough that forecasting becomes a little easier. So if you're looking to invest, the outcome and the future outlook is a little clearer to put together.
And from your standpoint, you mentioned on currency that your perspective, Cushman Wakefield's perspective, is that the currency is relatively stable. Yes. Any other comments on the currency?
I wish I could forecast it. We're just looking at an average, and it does form a daily conversation for us. Whether that's how we deal with that within contracts or how we're looking at forecasting this going forward. But I think most companies, from what I'm seeing, are setting relatively cautious estimates going into 2016. We're doing the same.
Yes.
So and from our perspective and a lot of our clients, that seems to be within a margin that's not out of the ordinary for the last 3 to 5 years.
All right. Well, Alex, of course, there you mentioned some challenges, and let's talk about some more challenges. How do you caution people coming into the market for the first time? What are some of the realistic risks that you have to be aware of if you're going to lease commercial or industrial property or buy commercial or industrial property here?
There's a lot of due diligence needs to be undertaken at every step.
Okay.
That can go through the market entry as you're coming in, forming a business that can take 9 to 12 months in itself.
Wow, long time.
If you're then established, or if you're looking at buildings, the levels of certificates and information that you need to obtain from these landlords and developers to ensure you're getting exactly what they're telling you can take an awfully long time, and there are many questions that need to be asked to establish exactly what you're buying, what you're leasing, or really what you're analysing. There's a lot of cases where buildings aren't meeting codes in some instances. There are developments that perhaps don't meet their consent. So there's a lot of background checks that need to be undertaken.
So how does Cushman Wakefield specifically help its clients here overcome some of that?
Sure. Well, as I said, we take the perspective from the buyers or occupiers side. We're one of the few in the market that doesn't always talk markets up. We work we're the bad guys for the developers more often than not. But going in with that viewpoint is we're there as risk managers as much as anything else. So we're constantly there checking and working through these due diligence parts, the legal aspects of all of this, whether that's on a small office deal or multi-million-pound deal, a dollar deal. That is very much where we pride ourselves in that deep knowledge of projects of developers or potential issues that you might get through regulations.
See, we've talked about Ho Chi Minh, we talked about Hanoi a bit. Any comments on the market in Danang, which is the third largest city in Vietnam? Do you do much business there, or any view of the market there specifically, or in central Vietnam?
Historically, not an awful lot. And the piece again about Cushman is we'll sort of go where needed. We're headquartered out of Ho Chi Minh City. We found ourselves in Danang more frequently over the last 12 months. We had someone there this week, in fact, for a large pharmaceutical group doing something in Danang, which is great to see. And it's coming up in inquiries as well for a lot of our multinational clients as the next city. It is the third largest. I think, again, the population there, education rates there are very, very good.
Yes.
Everyone's talking about the infrastructure and the ease of doing business in Danang compared to the other big two. So we found ourselves more in Danang, which is great. And I do see growth there. We've never sort of sold ourselves as experts in Danang, but again, going in with the viewpoint that we take, we can analyse that market for our clients and do what's necessary. But I think we'll probably close this year with 2 or 3 transactions in Danang, which is far more than we've done in the 2 years prior. So as a destination going forward, it's pretty exciting.
Very good. Well, one last question. In terms of clients that come in or are coming in and would normally think, yes, we need this amount of size of office space and would assume to lease, is there any point in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh or in Hanoi that's particularly interesting to note where you advise them, well, maybe you should consider buying your space versus leasing?
Yeah, interesting point. I think case by case we'll have that conversation. For most of the multinationals we deal with, they're not here to invest. We might see that trend over the next couple of years with the larger, long-established multinationals. Maybe they have 5 to 10,000 square meters of office space here that they've had for 10 years and have been leasing. Maybe they're now looking to consider these build-to-suit or long-term investment HQ opportunities. There have been a couple of cases in Ho Chi Minh. People like Unilever and Manulife have done that. So that is something I think will continue as these guys are scaling up as well.
Yes.
If an average HQ here is 4 years ago it was 1,000 square meters. Today it's probably 2, and in the next few years maybe they're scaling up to 5 or 6. At that point it starts to make sense just on the scales.
Okay.
Smaller occupiers and investors, those are a little more nimble. If they're not a multinational, maybe it's easier to distribute the funding to come in and acquire something. And Hanoi is probably more active in strata title sales, so floor by floor or small parts of building, which is quite interesting. Only a couple of cases of that in Ho Chi Minh City, but I think that's more market driven, that people not necessarily needing to sell because vacancy is lower. But it might be something we see going forward in the future.
Well, it's very interesting how you've described the differences between the 3 cities, and that's certainly important to investors as well as companies looking to come into the market. So, well, thank you. That concludes our topic today with Alex Crane, the General Manager of Cushman Wakefield Vietnam. Thank you very much, Alex, for your expertise and sharing time with us. And thank you for coming to Vietnam Real Estate Insights. Please come back for our monthly series of other leading experts talking about this market. I'm your host, Harlow Russell. Thanks for joining us.